Phase 4 hasn't been announced yet, but who is really going to be the big daddy pumpers when it drops? Here is the DPS tier list for Phase 4, Ice Crown Citadel. S tier. The S tier represents the most powerful classes in the current meta, those with the highest damage and utility. These specializations are usually recruited in larger numbers due to their outstanding performance. Fury Warrior. It took us a while, but we're finally here, back at the top spot. All of the armor penetration on Ice Crown Citadel gear, coupled with our great scaling, makes Fury Warriors a force to be reckoned with, offering the best single target and some of the best cleave damage in the game. Our tier 10 sets bonuses aren't as game-breaking as some other classes' set bonuses, but we really don't need them, we're incredibly strong anyway. Many guilds will choose to run multiple Fury Warriors at this point, as their damage is unparalleled. The main issue you're likely to face in this phase is that there's simply only so many Shadowmourns, and if you run multiple Furies along with Rets and DKs, you'll likely have to wait a while before you truly pop off with your legendary weapon. Fire Mage. Phase 4 gear gives us more crit than we know what to do with, allowing us to continue to be hot streak monsters in the S tier. Our tier 10 set having 2 incredible set bonuses is just the icing on the cake that is the Phase 4 for Fire Mages. It should be said, however, that while Fire Mages have jaw-dropping single-target damage in this phase, many specs have us beat in the cleave department. Ice Crown Citadel having a good amount of multi-target fights means that, in practice, you won't be on the top as cleanly as Fury Warriors will. Still, this isn't a very big issue, and many raids will elect to bring multiple Fire Mages in Phase 4, as having ranged damage dealers putting out this much DPS is a godsend. Combat Rogue. Our brief stint in the A tier is over, and in Phase 4 we return to our rightful place once more. Our tier 10 set doesn't have truly broken set bonuses like what some of the other classes get, but our incredible scaling firmly carries us into the S tier anyway. We have outstanding single-target damage and decent cleave damage, but, in Ice Crown Citadel, our fan of knives does a lot of heavy lifting for us, as there's lots and lots of AoEing to be done, an area where we actually beat the DPS specs ranked above us. Many raids will choose to bring multiple combat rogues in Phase 4, which is great, as it further allows us to improve our damage by trading the tricks of the trade buff with one another. Feral Druid. Those pesky Death Knights knocked us off our throne during Phase 3, but we're back with a feral vengeance. The abundance of armor penetration on gear during this phase, coupled with our bleed effects, means armor barely affects us, improving our damage drastically. Furthermore, our tier 10 set's 4-piece bonus gives us some extra crit scaling, which gives us that last push we needed to get back into the S tier. The issues we faced in previous phases still trouble us in Phase 4, however. Our single target damage is top tier and our AoE is amazing, there's no doubt about that, but our cleave damage isn't quite as good as some of the other specs in the S tier, hence our position near the bottom of the S tier. As a result, most guilds won't be heavily stacking cats like they will be Fury Warriors, Fire Mages, and Combat Rogues, though our ability to off-tank when necessary still means we're highly desirable regardless. Retribution Paladin. Retribution Paladins have been waiting and biding their time, ready for this very moment. The newly added Shadowmourn legendary weapon, along with our hilariously overpowered tier 10 set's 2-piece bonus, propel us from the realm of mediocrity straight into the S tier, in a way that's so thematically appropriate. We spring into the action right as we march up to Arthas's doorstep. Red Paladin single target damage is finally competitive. Our cleave damage, meanwhile, is simply outrageous, at a lack of a better term. In fights where there are consistently 2 to 4 targets, Retribution Paladins will stand at the very top. Coupled with our truly incredible utility, this makes Retribution Paladins an extremely desirable spec in Phase 4. Many guilds will typically bring 2 to 4 Retribution Paladins, so raid spots will be easy to come by. A tier. The A tier represents strong DPS specializations that offer a great amount of damage and utility, but not offering the best possible damage output. They will be found in almost every raid group, and it will be common to see more than one of each. Unholy Death Knight. Phase 4 sees Unholy Death Knights drop from our status as overpowered DPS gods in Phase 3, to a more modest spot at the top of the A tier. Phase 4 adds the legendary axe, Shadowmourn, which seriously pushes our damage capabilities. Notably, we finally get to come out of Frost's shadow, firmly establishing ourselves as the strongest DK specialization for DPS in Phase 4. The reason for this is simple: while our single target damage remains about equal to Frost. An abundance of AoE or cleave heavy fights where the targets don't die before our dots can tick finally give us the edge, as Pestilence propels us to heights that Frost simply cannot reach. We're not quite as strong as some of the big boys above us, so raids likely won't heavily stack Unholy DKs, but it won't be uncommon to see 2 to 3 in a raid, as our formerly Frost comrades switch to Unholy. Marksmanship Hunter. Marksmanship sees a slight drop in power in Phase 4, falling to the A tier as some of the classes with better scaling overtake us. This is by no means a big drop, however, as we're still near the top, offering some top-tier damage thanks to our very workable scaling and the abundance of armor penetration on Phase 4 equipment. From a purely single-target damage perspective, Marksmanship would normally qualify for the S tier, typically beating Feral Druids and Unholy DKs on some of the more melee-unfriendly fights. Yet, our main issue is that we don't have the AoE and cleave damage that the specs above us offer, and Icecrown Citadel has a decent chunk of AoE-centric fights, meaning we don't get to claim the top 4 to 5 DPS spots often. Regardless, our damage is more than fine, and misdirection is a massive boon for any raid, so it won't be hard to find a spot as an MM Hunter. We just won't be stacked as much as some of the specs above us will. Affliction Warlock. Our short slump in Phase 3 is over, as Affliction returns to the A tier in Phase 4. And it's not hard to see why. Our Tier 10 set's 4-piece bonus heavily favors Affliction over Demonology, and Icecrown Citadel bosses having a lot more HP means we get to go to town with Drained Soul, dealing some really good damage. The addition of the Phylactery of the Nameless Lich Trinket, which greatly boosts dot-based casters, helps a lot too. Affliction's role in Phase 4 can be described as a jack-of-all-trades. While we don't have the raw single-target, cleave, or AoE damage of some of the S-tier specs, we make up for that downside by having no real weak points. We do great single-target, cleave, and AoE damage. Moreover, we do it safely from afar, with our dots constantly ticking, meaning we aren't fazed by things like melee unfriendly, or by movement-heavy fights. The one downfall of the Affliction Warlock in Phase 4 is called Fire Mages. Those Warlock wannabes unfortunately surpass our single damage potential by a moderate amount in this phase and, as we directly compete with them for gear, it's hard to justify having more than 1 or 2 Affliction Warlocks in a raid. Still, we very much justify our spot, so Affliction mains have nothing to worry about. Frost Death Knight. Phase 4 plays a very evil prank on Frost DKs. We finally get to yield a shard of Arthas's iconic Death Knight weapon, Frostmourne, known as Shadowmourne, a two-handed axe. Frost being a dual-wield-centric specialization means that we, unfortunately, don't get to use this weapon at all. We could have been the absolute kings of single-target DPS in Phase 4, but Blizzard's cruel designers decided we'll be at the bottom of the A tier instead, a perfectly fine spot, all jokes aside. Our single-target damage is about middle of the pack here, but our cleave and AoE damage are still very good. However, Unholy is sadly better at both, so, as a result, most Death Knights will respec to Unholy at this point, unless your raid happens to urgently need the improved Icy Talons buff, which a Blood DK tank could provide anyway, by spending some extra points in the Frost Tree, limiting our usefulness. B tier. Shadow Priests, Balanced Druids, Arcane Mages, Assassination Rogues, and Demo Warlocks. While I suspect some highly skilled players will be able to push these specs into higher tiers, for the average player these specs will do well, but handily below the above tiers. C tier. Enhancement Shaman, Destro Warlock, Survival Hunter, Elemental Shaman, BM Hunter. I suspect a small handful of Spellhance Shaman will compete in DPS, the other specs in this tier just fall short. D tier. Arms Warrior, Blood DK, Sub-Rogue, Frost Mage. Simply put, specs in the D tier are considered to be not viable. They can be fun to play, but you will struggle to get invited to raids when playing one of these, and you may even find yourself getting kicked from groups, as your damage will be lacking. Who do you think will be the top DPS in ICC? Drop your comments below.